Hello, students. Let's talk about political philosophy. Political philosophy is simply a branch of political science. It's American government, but it's really beyond that. It's the oldest part and foundation and the fundamental piece of the framework of politics. It's the oldest of the social sciences. The study of political philosophy involves the study and examination of the writings of the great philosophers in history, from Socrates to Aristotle, Plato, Hobbes, Locke, Paine, etc. These books and their thoughts may be ancient in nature, but we still turn to them regarding continuing questions that are posed in political science and in the study of government. Only we can provide the answers to the problems that we face. The works provide us with the permanent questions that political scientists rely upon in their work and define the problems that scholars battle. In the sciences, they're absolute. In political philosophy, there are no absolute answers, and there are no absolute authorities on what is correct. There's disagreement between all the great thinkers on what is right and what is wrong. And it is these disagreements that help us to have conversations. We don't rely upon their answers, but rather we use them in our own methods of reason and judgment to come up with solutions. As long as humans exist and we have government to provide order, we will continue to have great questions that need to be answered. What's justice? What are the goals of a decent and virtuous society? How should a citizen be educated? And why should we obey the law? The three big ancient philosophers are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and they are credited with addressing these very questions. Socrates is credited as one of the founders of American philosophy. The cloud of mystery surrounding his life and philosophical views propose a problem so large that it's given a name itself, the Socratic problem. Since he did not write philosophical texts, all knowledge related to him is entirely dependent on the writings of other people of that time period. Works by Plato, Aristotle, and others contain all the knowledge known about this enigma of a figure. His largest contribution to philosophy is the Socratic method. The Socratic method is defined as a form of inquiry and discussion between individuals based on asking and answering questions to illuminate ideas. This method is performed by asking question after question with the purpose of seeking to expose contradictions in one's thoughts, guiding him or her to arrive at a solid, tenable conclusion. The principle underlying the Socratic method is that humans learn through the use of reasoning and logic, ultimately finding holes in their own theories and then patching them up. Following Socrates was Plato, and then Aristotle, Plato's student. In his book, The Republic, Plato distinguishes three parts in man: needs, heart, and knowledge, corresponding to the three classes that are in society. First are the peasants, artisans, traders, who excel in the conduct of domestic life. Second, there's the warrior class. They're responsible for ensuring the defense and who want to distinguish themselves by their bravery. The third are the holders of knowledge, namely philosophers. The separation of roles leads in Plato to a hierarchy of social classes. According to him, the philosophers, the famous theory of the philosopher king, must be led by a city. Again, the cities must be led by philosophers. This hierarchy comes from the relationship with knowledge of each class. The people are guided by opinion and illusions, and therefore can't rationally decide to conduct the business of the city state. Warriors seek glory. Plato recognizes their nobility, but irrationally because they rely primarily on their physical strength. Okay? Finally, philosophers are in an intimate relationship with knowledge. They spend all their time simply thinking. So it makes sense for Plato to give the reins of the city to the philosophers. Now, you also have Aristotle. He claimed that society is divided into two classes. Simply put, the rich and the poor. Aristotle assigns everyone the same ability to reason, although it does not deny that we should be really rational to lead a city. And he replied that in adding the individual rationality, that rationality can be achieved collectively, sort of a super rationality to some extent. It is for this reasons that the poor, necessarily more numerous, must govern. Aristotle decides in favor of a democracy. This equality in the exercise of reason is an obvious consequence: equal political rights. Aristotle defends a scheme to free citizens, which of course excludes slaves and so-called barbarians, in which he is both a condition and purpose of a democracy. Now, for Aristotle, democracy rests on the government of each by all and all for each in turn. So let's summarize this. Plato believes in this sort of elitist political position where knowledge and reason prevail. However, according to Aristotle, the power comes from below and is exercised on behalf of all. It is basically a fairly modern democracy where social positions are open when power is self control and where governance is followed. All right. Now, let's jump ahead 2,000 years to discuss Hobbes, Locke, and Montesquieu and Rousseau. They have views on government, and this is starting roughly in the 1600s. And around that time, European philosophers began debating the question of who should govern a nation. As the absolute rule of kings weakened, Enlightenment philosophers argued for a different form of democracy. All of their writings are rooted in the ideas and questions put forth by Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. In 1649, a civil war broke out over who would rule England. Would it be Parliament or would it be King Charles I? The war ended with the beheading of the king. Shortly after Charles was executed, an English philosopher, Thomas Hobbes, wrote the Leviathan. This book is a defense of the absolute power of kings. Now, the title of the book referred to a Leviathan, a mythological whale-like sea monster that devoured whole ships. Hobbes likened the Leviathan to government, a powerful state created to impose order. Now, Hobbes began his Leviathan by describing the state of nature, where all individuals are naturally equal. Every person was free to do what he or she needed to do in order to survive. Now, as a result, everyone suffered from continued fear and danger of violent death. And the life of man was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. That's a very famous quote. In the state of nature, there were no laws or anyone to enforce them. The only way out of the situation, Hobbes said, was for individuals to create some supreme power to impose peace on everyone. Now, Hobbes borrowed a concept from English contract law, an implied agreement. Hobbes asserted that the people agreed among themselves to, quote, lay down their natural rights of equality and freedom and give absolute power to a sovereign. The sovereign, created by the people, might be a person or a group. The sovereign would make and enforce the laws to secure a peaceful society, making life, liberty, and property possible. Hobbes called this agreement the social contract. Hobbes believed that a government headed by a king was the best form that the sovereign could take. Placing all power in the hands of a king would mean more resolute and consistent exercise of political authority. Hobbes also maintained that the social contract was an agreement only among the people and not between them and their king. Now, once the people had given absolute power to the king, they had no right to revolt against him. Hobbes warned against the church meddling with the king's government. He feared that religion could become a source of civil war. Thus, he advised that the church become a department of the king's government, which would closely control all religious affairs. In any conflict between the divine and royal law, Hobbes wrote, the individual should obey the king or simply choose death. So, as you see, Hobbes was influenced more by Plato's idea of an aristocracy to lead nations. Now, you have Enlightenment philosophers like John Locke and Charles Montesquieu, and all developed theories of government in which some or even all the people would govern. Both men were greatly influenced by Aristotle and his idea of democracy. These thinkers thus had a profound effect on the American and French revolutions and the democratic governments that they produced. So let's talk about Locke. He's the reluctant Democrat. John Locke sided with the Protestant Parliament against the Roman Catholic King James II in the Glorious Revolution of 1685. The event reduced the power of the king and made Parliament the major authority in English government. In 1690, Locke published his two treatises of government. He generally agreed with Hobbes about the brutality of the state of nature, which required a social contract to assure peace. But he disagreed with Hobbes on two major points. First, Locke argued that natural rights such as life, liberty, and property existed in the state of nature and could never be taken away or even voluntarily given up by individuals. These rights were inalienable, meaning they were impossible to surrender. Locke also disagreed with Hobbes about the social contract. For him, it was not just an agreement among the people, but between them and the sovereign, preferably a king. Now, according to Locke, the natural rights of individuals limited the power of the king. The king did not hold absolute power, as Hobbes had said, but acted only to enforce and protect the natural rights of the people. If a sovereign violated these rights, the social contract was therefore broken, and the people had the right to revolt and establish a new government. Less than 100 years after Locke wrote this, Thomas Jefferson used this theory in writing the Declaration of Independence. Now, although Locke spoke out for freedom of thought, speech, and religion, he believed property to be the most important natural right. He declared that owners may do whatever they want with their property as long as they do not invade the rights of others. Government, he said, was mainly necessary to promote the public good, and that it's to protect property and to encourage commerce and little else. Locke favored a representative government such as the English Parliament, which had hereditary House of Lords and an elective House of Commons. But he wanted representatives to be only men of property and business. Consequently, only adult male property owners should have the right to vote, according to Locke. He was reluctant to allow the propertyless masses of people to participate in government because he believed that they were unfit. The supreme authority of government, Locke said, should reside in the law-making legislature like England's parliament. The executive, or the prime minister, and courts would be creations of the legislature and therefore under its authority.